Thank you for coming. I have to say, this is a little daunting for me. I am Dr. Kimberly Stoner, the Director of Advocacy for Connecticut NOFA. I have just been in this post for about 10 months now, and the Farm Bill is so big and so complex that in preparing this introduction to it, I felt like I was skating the surface of what I know. I've been able to speak with people from other organic farming organizations. I have a regular meeting with people from the other NOFAs and from MOFGA, and have learned a lot from them. And I've studied a lot of websites and podcasts that I'll present at the end of the talk. But I just want to make sure that I say that I am not an expert. I am learning, and I hope to learn from the rest of the panelists and from participants as well. So to introduce the Farm Bill, it is federal legislation. It covers all the different things that the U.S. Department of Agriculture is involved in, which is not just farming, but also food and the food system, and a lot of forestry, a lot of the economics of food. So it's quite big and complex. I have heard from my colleagues that ultimately it will be about 1,000 pages long. It has a huge effect on what is grown in this country, how it's grown, how it's sold, all of that. It's what's called an omnibus bill. So it's a package of many marker bills that are combined into one bill. Actually, there will be one large bill in the House, one large bill in the Senate. Then they will have a conference and work out their differences, ultimately pass that bill again and send it to the president. But we're going to talk some about marker bills, because at this stage, that's mostly what people talk about, are these bills that are floated by Congress people or senators, mostly people in the House or the Senate Agriculture Committee, to see how much support they get and whether they can be incorporated into the large Farm Bill. It's passed roughly every 5 years. The last one expired technically at the end of the federal fiscal year, September 30th. You may remember that on September 30th, we were talking about whether the government would shut down. And so the Farm Bill was not part of that discussion. That had to do with appropriations for essentially all of the different parts of the federal government. But the Farm Bill is a separate issue, so that the agreement that is keeping the government open until the middle of November is a different thing from what's going on with the Farm Bill. It was already pretty clear before the mess that's going on right now in the House of Representatives that the Farm Bill would not be likely to pass before the end of this year. So what happens now is that most of the programs have funding through the end of the year. If Congress doesn't pass an extension of the current bill or a new Farm Bill by then, things get complicated. Some of the programs have what's called permanent funding, and so they will continue on, and other programs do not. This is the Farm Bill pie as it was projected at the time that the last Farm Bill was passed. So you can see that about 3/4 of the money goes to nutrition programs. For example, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which is SNAP. A big chunk goes to crop insurance, another and to commodities. So that's the major crops like corn, soybeans, wheat, cotton. And then there's a chunk that goes to conservation, and we'll talk quite a bit about that piece. You can see the tiny sliver that's other includes lots of other things, forestry, for example, credit, research, lots of other things. So, but we're mostly going to talk about these big pieces. So there's pretty widespread agreement across many, many different sources that the food system is pretty much broken in the United States. And these are some statistics that I gathered from different sources. So 1 in 7 households with children in the US is food insecure. And even though the Farm Bill spent $326 billion on nutrition programs over the last 5 years, still, and with these other programs that happened during COVID, still a lot of households are food insecure. The median farm income in the US has been negative for the 24 of the last 25 years. That means that at least half of the farmers have been losing money, have had negative income for most of the last 25 years. And big corporations control most of US agriculture. So I've presented several different statistics here, but one that I find really striking is that of the 4 companies that sell the vast majority of corn and soybean seeds, 3 of those companies also sell the majority of agrochemicals. So the same companies control seed for these major crops, agrochemicals. Some of those companies also are part of the companies that control 90% of grain trading. So there's a lot of corporate control of all aspects of the food system. Farming is also a big part of greenhouse gas emissions. So this is calculated just on the farming itself, this 11% of US greenhouse gas emissions. So not on the whole food system, including the processing, transportation, food waste, which is huge greenhouse gas emitter. And you can see that a lot of the emissions are actually nitrogen. There's that's N2O, so that's various forms of nitrogen going into the atmosphere, which are very powerful greenhouse gases, as is methane, which is CH4, and then a substantial amount of carbon dioxide as well. So I'm not sure how much of this you can see, actually, but so animal feeding operations are another aspect of our food system that create a lot of other kinds of pollution in addition to greenhouse gas emissions. So water pollution, particularly nitrogen and phosphorus, air pollution, particularly ammonium and hydrogen sulfide, but also methane and other pollutants. So how does the Farm Bill support this? How did we get here? The Farm Bill in 1933 was part of the New Deal, and the idea was supply management, was to reduce the overproduction of commodities and manage prices, because farmers at that point were leaving crops in the field, destroying crops because the cost to harvest them was not even going to be paid for by the prices they were getting. And this was also the Depression, as well as the Dust Bowl. So another point of the original Farm Bill was to protect soils, particularly on vulnerable lands, and then as part of supply management to take a lot of the vulnerable land out of agricultural production. But in many ways, we're back where we were, except with a lot of corporations in control. So the Farm Bill stimulates the overproduction of commodities through economic incentives in the commodity title, and also because the crop insurance, the way it's structured, works much better for ensuring the risks of farmers who grow these major commodities. That results in really cheap grain for animal feeding operations and for processing into ethanol and corn syrup. And even a lot of the conservation title funding supports animal feeding operations, these big corporate, highly polluting animal feeding operations. So by law, 50% of this program, the environmental quality incentives programs, has to go to livestock operations. And people who have looked at it have seen that they tend to go to really big polluting aspects of the animal feeding operations. So there's just not a lot of support for other forms of agriculture, specialty crops like growing food for people, organic farming, new and underserved farmers that are working on local markets. There's not enough funding and technical support for conservation programs. So farmers want to participate in these programs. They're voluntary programs, and they want to conserve their own soil and water. But 3 out of 4 farmers are rejected because the money runs out regularly. Although last year, the Inflation Reduction Act put $20 billion extra dollars into the conservation programs to try and alleviate the backlog of years of farmers applying for this money and not being able to get it. And then SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, feeds 41 million people, but it's also so full of restrictions that it makes it difficult for a lot of people who need food to get on the program and to stay on the program. So my colleagues in organic farming organizations developed these policy goals. So this is like the vision. And of course, we want a farm bill that invests and protects the integrity of organic and ecological practices, ensures fair treatment and just livelihoods for farmers and farm workers, invests in rural communities, centers racial justice, promotes food sovereignty for disadvantaged communities, and ensures nutrition for all, and then eliminates the use of toxic substances. So then I think mainly what I would do is direct you to the website that's at the top of this page, which is a way for people to take action where you can write letters in support of several of the marker bills that the NOFAs have taken interest in. For those who are primarily interested in climate change, the Agricultural Resilience Act is really a comprehensive, it's kind of an omnibus bill itself, addressing climate change mitigation and adaptation with a lot of specific practices involved. And so that's something for the people who are interested in climate change particularly to pay attention to. Let's see. And then these are some of my sources of information. For people who like podcasts, I really recommend The Farm Bill Uprooted, which is I've learned a lot from. It has 6 episodes talking about all these different historical aspects of the Farm Bill, the economic aspects, nutritional aspects, and the last episode is about solutions. but these are other good sources of information about the Farm Bill. And so I will then stop sharing. Oh, I thought I would stop sharing. Let's see.
Yeah, you stopped.
Okay, good. All right, now I can see. All right. So, all right, so now I will pass it on to the panelists. I guess I will pass it first to MC Whalen, and who is the coordinator of the new Connecticut Farmers Network, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Thank you so much, Kim. I'm really excited to be here and also benefited a lot from your presentation. I really appreciated some of the context and some of those stats about corporate control of agriculture are super interesting and super terrifying. So thank you for having me here. Really appreciate NOFA and all the work that you do to support farmers and to fight for climate change and sustainability and environmental protection in the ag system. As Kim said, my name's MC Whalen. I'm the coordinator of the New Connecticut Farmer Alliance. I'm also a farmer. I've been farming for 9 years, and I work at Masara Community Farm in Woodbridge, Connecticut, and I live in New Haven. I'm gonna also share my screen. I have a slideshow. I have many links that go along with the things that I'm going to talk about, but it's a little bit too unwieldy for me to go back and forth between presenting my slides and putting the links in the chat. So I will just plan to put all of my links in at the end once my presentation is finished. So don't fear, you'll be able to learn more about all the things that I talk about at the various websites, and I'll share that after. Maybe it can also go out in a follow-up email after this webinar. So let me start by sharing my screen. Can everybody see that? Okay, great. As I said, I'm with the New Connecticut Farmer Alliance, and I'll start by just giving y'all a little bit of background on what our organization is and what we do. The New CT Farmer Alliance, or NICTFA for short, was started back in, I think, like 2010, when a bunch of farmers got together and realized there really wasn't an organization that represented the next generation of farmers in Connecticut. A lot of folks who were particularly interested in getting into farming because we believe that farmers are part of the solution to climate change. We believe in food justice. We believe in a lot of the progressive issues that farmers can be at the front lines of. And there just wasn't really an org in Connecticut, for us. So the original steering committee came together and started planning events and networking, community building opportunities, and farmer-to-farmer education. And that's still what we do to this day, with the addition of increasingly over the past few years, we have been working more on our capacity to advocate for policy change. Our mission is to bring together emerging farmers from across Connecticut to network, share resources, and identify common challenges and opportunities for a more accessible, successful, and diverse agricultural community. We have about 600 members from all around the state, and truly it's all around the state. I think, probably the majority of towns are represented, which is really exciting. And, oh, Jeremy, I'm going to mute you. And a great opportunity when it comes to advocacy, especially state level advocacy, because, we do have folks in a lot of different districts. For a little bit of background info on who our members are, according to a 2022 survey that we sent out, 80% of folks are first generation farmers, 67% are under 40 years old. The majority of those in our group are women. The average amount of land that a farmer in our organization is farming is 19 acres, which is quite a bit smaller than the statewide average. I think the statewide average is like 60 something. And we've got a lot of different folks in the group, plenty of full-time farmers, but also people who are really making farming work in addition to a lot of other income sources. Either they're farming in addition to a full-time job, they're farming part-time. That's actually what I do. I do, this work with the Alliance more in the winter, and I farm more in the summer. And we've got aspiring farmers as well. So a whole range of people, all of whom are really passionate and excited about agriculture. And it's a pretty great group to be a part of, I think. So also in that 2022 survey, we set our policy priorities for the group. We had folks vote and rank their priorities. The foundation of our policy platform is a commitment to racial justice in Connecticut agriculture. We recognize that the food system as it is built on colonialism and white supremacy. And we want to make sure that whatever policy actions we take, racial justice is really at the heart of it, because we don't believe that you could adequately transform the food system without considering racial justice to be at the core of what needs to change. Built on that foundation, our policy pillars are to, one, improve the economic viability of farming. It is hard out here to make a living. I gotta say, you cannot sell vegetables for very much money, and it takes a lot of money to grow them. Two, make farmland more accessible. Connecticut has some of the most expensive farmland in the state. I think the average cost per acre is, in the country, I think the average cost per acre is $12,500 versus a few thousand in the majority of the other states. Improve agricultural infrastructure in Connecticut is our third pillar. There's a lot of need for more aggregation and transportation and cold storage options for farmers to be able to adequately market our products. 4, confront climate change and build climate resilience. As I said, a lot of folks are interested in agriculture specifically because we believe that farmers are part of the climate change solution. And we want to make sure that the state is funding that, and that that's an opportunity that we're able to follow in our farming journeys. And 5, although it's definitely related to number 1, we really wanted to pull out specifically increase access to affordable healthcare for farmers. A lot of the folks that I know are either purposefully keeping their farm income low enough so that they still register for Husky or for subsidies on the state marketplace, or are going without insurance, or are relying on their spouse to have insurance when, maybe they both want to be farming. So that's a pretty big issue for our members that we talk a lot about. We are also a chapter of the National Young Farmer Coalition. And while our policy platform is focused a lot on state issues, the National Young Farmer Coalition policy platform is focused largely on national issues. Excuse me. And they have been doing a ton of Farm Bill advocacy that folks from our membership and from our steering committee have been participating in. And I'm really excited to be a chapter of theirs right now, because their federal work is really, really important and exciting to me. I'll send a link after to their whole agenda. It's definitely worth reading through. It's based on a really comprehensive long survey that they did of farmers around the country, and provides a lot of insight into what farmers need. But out of that survey emerged their priorities for the Farm Bill and for their 2023 policy agenda, which is land access, climate change, water justice, USDA accountability, access to credit, immigration and labor, student debt, and farmer mental health. There's so much to talk about in each of those categories, but I'm just going to pull out a couple for us to talk about today, and I'll let you poke around their website for more info on some of the other campaigns. The first one that I want to pull out is access to land. Young Farmers has something called the 1 Million Acres for the Future campaign. The current president of sorry, just getting over a cold. The current president of NICTFA and the former president of NICTFA and one of our former steering committee members all participated in a fly-in down to DC this year to talk to their legislators, specifically about increasing land access opportunities for new and beginning farmers in Connecticut. So as Kim was saying, 2 of the bills that we think would really go a long way towards land access in the Farm Bill are Increasing Land Access Security and Opportunities Act and the Justice for Black Farmers Act. It's very, very, very rare that the USDA will spend any money available for direct land purchase, which makes it really hard to get into farming. It's kind of like if you have land already, then you can benefit from a lot of the USDA programs. But if you don't have access to land, you're like kind of out of luck. And that's really tough. And it means that we continue to funnel resources towards farmers that are already better off, that already have access to capital, that are growing those commodity crops on a huge scale. And, new and beginning farmers who are working on leased land or who have really small plots, even though we're technically eligible for a lot of the programs, they just don't match up to to what our scale is and what our needs are. And often a lot of the paperwork and the bureaucracy of applying to some of the programs is not worth the time because the payoff is based on reimbursement rates that are calculated for these giant farms and aren't really as relevant if you've got a small space. So we're really excited about the Increasing Land Access Security and Opportunities Act because it would give federal funds directly towards getting equitable leases or land purchase for farmers. And we do hope that it will focus on farmers of color and historically underserved farmers as well. Also wanted to zoom in, of course, on climate change. I just feel in my soul so strongly that young farmers are some of the most passionate land stewards and workers towards climate justice that are out there. And I really want to see the next farm bill support us in that work. I think climate goals, climate resiliency, climate change mitigation is often just a secondary outcome of the work that we do on our farms that is not compensated and that we just do because we are really passionate about it and we believe in it. And I want to see the government recognize that as a really important ecosystem service, a really important community service that we're doing, and make sure that farmers are adequately compensated for it. So one of the bills that we're excited about that I think would help young farmers fund climate mitigation work is the Small Farm Conservation Act. This would make some of the existing NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service programs, a little bit easier to use for smaller farms. And smaller farms would be more likely to receive a bigger benefit from these programs, as well as Kim mentioned, the Agricultural Resilience Act. I also wanted to just build on something that Kim said about the IRA funding for some of the conservation programs. It was really, really exciting to see such a large pot of money come through that federal spending bill. And I'm seeing NRCS like hiring new people left and right and like opening application windows. And it's really exciting that funding is coming through. And I really do believe that a lot of folks in Connecticut will benefit. And I want to make sure that the federal government sees that funding as supplementary to what is going to be included in the Farm Bill and not a replacement for what is going to be in the Farm Bill. So I don't want to see them cut the funding for those conservation programs. I want to really see it be a supplement because, as Dr. Sterner was saying, there's so much need and there's so much demand for a lot of NRCS's conservation programs. I wanted to shout out an example of what it can look like for the state to be investing money in climate solutions and climate innovations driven by farmers. Last year, the Connecticut State Legislature passed $7 million of funding for climate smart ag and forestry grants. The Department of Agriculture administered those, and the CT Farmer Alliance was lucky enough to get one of those grants. So now we have this huge pot of money, and I'm very, very excited. We just get to give it out to farmers to do climate smart projects on their land. So that could look like improving their soil health so that they're sequestering more carbon every year. That could look like doing more agroforestry work so that there are perennial crops that are there year after year, storing carbon, good for the pollinators, good for the farm business. It could also look like building the farm's resilience to extreme weather events, which we are experiencing every single year now. Putting shade cloth on your greenhouse or your high tunnel to make sure that your hot season crops are able to survive some of the really, really high temps that we're getting these days. Installing a fan to move air around so that in that hot weather, mid-July, mid-August, your tomatoes aren't all succumbing to, disease in the same week. So we're really excited to see the projects that folks come up with. If you know any farmers or if you're a farmer, definitely consider applying. I'll put the link also to that in a minute. And then also, like Dr. Sterner, I wanted to just share a couple of the resources that I really like to learn about the Farm Bill. There's this really great zine that's available both in English and in Spanish called Food, Land, and Us. I'll link to that in the chat. And then I also really like the work that the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition does. They've got some really great farm bill explanations on their website. And a lot of times the things that they choose to support, I feel very aligned with. And then I also have a call to action. Because land is such a critical part of this picture. Without land access, it's really, really hard for new and beginning farmers to do anything about climate change at all. I'm really hoping that y'all will join me in taking action for land access by supporting the 1 million acres for the future campaign. I'll put a link to that in the chat, but Young Farmers has like a whole landing page where you can contact your legislators, or you can share the toolkit, the advocacy toolkit. You can learn more. So yeah, hoping that y'all can all come out and support that. And I think that is the end of my presentation. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and get to putting together a list of links for y'all.
Okay, thank you very much, MC. Okay, and so our next panelist is Peter Zapata, who works with Gather New Haven as the Farm and Wellness Coordinator. I believe that I have that right. And so welcome, and let's hear from you.
Hi, thank you, Dr. Stoner. I appreciate this opportunity.
Yeah.
It's well, actually, I have a presentation I can share. See if I can do that. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
So just a heads up, I created this presentation for something unrelated, but I think it's relevant enough that I can use it for this presentation. And I'll have to speed through it. It's a bit lengthy, so you might notice that I'll skip through some slides just because I want to be conscious of our time. So I have a slide here. There it is. I am the manager for the farm-based wellness program at Gather New Haven. I have in some way or another been involved with food or agriculture for a long time now. And just growing up in Bridgeport, which is where I'm from, it was difficult to really learn what I've come to learn over many years on my own. And really what I'm referring to mostly is nutrition. I think that it's something that impacts all of us, and yet we don't really have that built into the formal education system, at least not where I went to school anyway, which was a public school in Bridgeport. And for me, a turning point was when I recognized the connection of food and our health. And that probably happened at some point late in high school, but it basically helped me direct where I wanted to go with my life and what I wanted to do. So here I am, very fortunate to be with Gather and running their farm-based wellness program. So just a little bit about Gather. I want to plug them in as a whole organization. Gather New Haven is actually the result of a merger of the New Haven Land Trust and New Haven Farms, which was where the farm-based wellness program came from, New Haven Farms. But also the urban farms that we manage was from New Haven Farms. Essentially, back in 2012, there was a collaboration between a program over at Fairhaven Community Health and Chabasco's Bakery, which is a local business in Fairhaven. And they used the community garden and basically used the National Diabetic Prevention Program, which is the core curriculum on which the farm-based wellness program operates. And from there grew New Haven Farms. And back to today, so now we have a farm that is dedicated to providing fruits and vegetables, or mainly vegetables, to the participants of the program. So I'll just give like an elevator pitch of the program, but there's so much to it. Essentially, we meet in the summer mostly for 16 weeks. And for those 16 weeks, we meet once a week for 2 hours. And for those 2 hours, we engage the participants in urban gardening activities and mindfulness practice and the National Diabetic Prevention Program. And we also do cooking recipes or cooking demonstrations and give them a recipe. Ideally, we try to time it so that we're giving them recipes that are part of the crop share that they're getting that week. And then we also engage them in exercise activities outside of the program. And throughout the rest of the year, we actually engage them monthly. So we go from a weekly program to a monthly program. And we've seen that really as anything where you have to really put a lot of effort into it. One of our biggest challenges is retention and trying to find people that really want to stick to it. But there's a large part that comes from them wanting it and not just us providing it. So it's going to continue. One of the things here that I want to clarify is the fact that health really is something that is cumulative, and there are so many different things that actually impact our health. Perhaps some of you are aware of the social determinants of health, and one can't really assess what someone is going through and what might be their barriers to living a more healthy lifestyle without taking this into context. I'm just going to fly through this. There's a video here. I'm not going to do that. So when I created this video, initially, I wanted to give the folks within a certain neighborhood where I was presenting kind of like an idea of their own barriers to health and how that impacts them with respect to life expectancy. So here we have the life expectancy at birth. We see that we have one state in particular that is in rough shape. I believe that's Mississippi, but I could be wrong. And as we get closer and zoom in, we see that in Connecticut, we have a large disparity of life expectancy as well. And you'll notice, perhaps, if you're aware of Connecticut and where some of these red spaces are, it's actually concentrated in Bridgeport and the Hartford area. You might see some in Waterbury, New Britain. So those are the more heavily populated cities in Connecticut, and they tend to be more proportionately of people of color. And so here we have a map of New Haven, and there was one neighborhood that I zoomed into. I believe that was Newhawville, and that was the place where I was actually giving this presentation. And you may have noticed from the beginning, let me go back here a little bit. We have in Connecticut a range from 56 to 97. But here we actually have a significantly lower life expectancy. And something that I won't have time to get into, but I did mention in the social determinants of health, which I want to point out really quickly, is the neighborhood and built environment, which is something that we really need to make sure that we're taking into context, and how this relates to the Farm Bill that we'll get to in a bit. Let me just try to run through here to some relatively relevant items. So the reason that I made this slide here was to kind of show that the reasons, the 10 leading causes of death in the United States as of 2020 may seem like they're all kind of standing on their own: heart disease, cancer, stroke, and diabetes. But something that I think is really important to recognize is that the comorbidity of most of the top three that I'm pointing out there typically tends to be diabetes. And as I know myself, diabetes is actually only counted when you have diabetic ketoacidosis. And so that's not normally the way that people with diabetes die. They normally die of heart disease, cancer, or stroke. And so I think it's really relevant to take that into consideration when you look at these statistics. Well, actually, this is pretty relevant as well. In identifying environmental and maternal causes that are responsible, we see that maternal nutritional status and chronic maternal diseases such as diabetes are one of the major factors that contributes to congenital anomalies. So this was an example I brought up because I wanted to show kind of like the major ingredients in some of the foods that are very typical in some ethnicities in New Haven, particularly in the Hispanic ethnicities. And just some items there for reference, yellow 5 and red 40. Can see that they were approved back, yellow 5 was in 69 and red 40 was in 71. So as you can imagine, back at that time, their testing and generally scientific knowledge was much lower than it is today. And yet we created a standard that is still in existence today that would probably not hold up if it was put to the test again. And we're actually seeing the consequences of that in various different forms. So again, I'm going to run through this. I'm sorry, I'm not going to explain this in detail, but I just wanted to show some of the major ingredients that you find in a lot of the cheaper foods, which again is really the reason that I'm presenting this is because of how that relates to the Farm Bill. You might notice some popular foods here. And you might also notice that a lot of these foods are actually marketed to children. And if you're not aware, the way that it's typically, like the ingredients are typically listed is from most used within the product to least used. So you may notice that in this Twizzler here, the main ingredient is corn syrup. And I'm not going to comment on corn syrup itself, but how maybe it's related to the Farm Bill. And I'll get to that in a bit. And here I'm not really going to go over this in too great a detail. I only put this here because I wanted to make a point that the USDA does create My Plate, and that shifted from the food pyramid as we used to know it. And dairy, I believe, was also a part of the food pyramid. But I will say that within the broader context, in my belief, in my opinion, the only reason dairy is there is an economic decision rather than an actual need, because essentially it fits within the context of protein, but it's been put there to be promoted all on its own. And really briefly, within the program, we do promote a whole food plant-based diet. It's not with the intention of trying to make anybody a vegetarian or a vegan. It is simply to try to increase people's familiarity with how to consume more fiber generally. And this is just a brief statistic, or not statistic, just a general statement, and how less than half of the adults actually get the recommended physical activity, which as of right now, I believe is 150 minutes per week, which should be done in approximately within 2 days. So this is now getting kind of to the point of the program, which is trying to help people understand how it is to address well, actually something that I didn't mention, which was definitely relevant and I should mention, is that the patients or participants that we typically serve are patients from Fairhaven Community Health that have been determined to have some symptom of prediabetes or been diagnosed with prediabetes. So we're working mostly with pre-diabetic patients, but this is definitely relevant to probably anyone, as everybody is impacted to some extent or another with their health, on their activity, and also their diet. Okay. So this is kind of like a plug of the program. We actually just wrapped up recently. It was great. I'm not sure why I have that again. Okay. Here are some pictures of the program. Really love it. The idea with the urban gardening is really to try to get folks familiar with how to tend to a garden. We want them to come out of the program feeling comfortable to tend to their own community garden plot at the end, which I'm actually forgot to mention. Among the other programs that Gather manages is the community garden plots. Most of the community garden plots throughout the city are actually managed through Gather New Haven. And we provide resources for anybody that's interested in getting a plot in their local neighborhood. I believe at this time there's about 46 active community gardens. There are, of course, community gardens that run independently of Gather, but we definitely have a hand in a lot of them. So definitely worth mentioning. So this is what I was mentioning. We do demonstrations and sometimes we actually serve food. It's great. And really the idea with trying to get people on the farm is to reignite that connection that people may have lost in living in urban environments to their food, and again, how that impacts our health. So these are some activities that we went through. All right, so how does this relate to the Farm Bill? Well, from my perspective, I think that the Farm Bill is really the intersection of where the rubber meets the road. So I actually looked it up right before the presentation and found that in America, we only use about 2 to 3% of our agricultural land for growing fruits and vegetables, and that's combined. So why is that the case? Well, we're living in a landscape that is in a great way impacted by the Farm Bill, and that is one of the many ways. It may not have any specific language about only limiting it to that small percentage, but what it does do is it incentivizes growing certain things, and that typically means that those things that are incentivized will take the place of something that might be more useful for the population's health. And so what we see is that the Farm Bill is typically prioritizing the needs of the greater economic purpose rather than taking into consideration the needs of the health of the population. And to a great extent, we're seeing that now, and we have been for a very long time. There's just so many things that I could talk about. I'm trying to like really concentrate this so that I don't go on a tangent here, but for many years, there's been kind of a transition of like what has been done historically to where we are now. And one of the most significant, in my opinion, is the way that we deal with the business of seeds. And seeds, maybe about 100 years ago, maybe approximately, were given away by the USDA, by the Postal Service. I think they were also involved. And so we had programs of free seeds. Moving to today, we're living in a world where seeds can actually be patented. And so this creates an economic landscape where people are actually not even able to save their own seed for fear that they might be saving a seed that was crossed with something that is a trait that's been patented, such as the Roundup Ready corn, for example, that is sold by, I think it's Bayer that owns them. And so you can see how this starts to complicate things. People can't even save their own seeds, and it just becomes a mess. And here we are today. But most relevant to this conversation, at least from my perspective on the nutrition side, as you mentioned, Dr. Stoner, that about 75% of the money is actually going to supplemental nutrition assistance program. And part of that is also the supplemental nutrition assistance education program, which I actually worked on myself. But we're still in a circumstance where we are still dealing with food insecurity to a large extent. As you mentioned, 1 in 7 houses, that is a lot. And we're still not really finding the right solution to the health circumstance that America finds itself in and how the food is connected to that. And so they seem to be running on a paradigm that they're disconnected, but in essence, they are very connected and would explain why we are in our position today. Something that I think is really relevant is how the USDA is also in charge of actually making My Plate. They were the ones that did the food pyramid. And something that you may have noticed, which I can just go back to it really quickly, is that half of the plate is actually fruits and vegetables. Now, when I present this to the people in the program and I'm telling them that half of their plate should be fruits and vegetables, there is a disconnect between what this is encouraging and what people can actually afford. Now, fruits and vegetables tend to be the most expensive thing that you're going to find relative to how long it lasts, right? If I can go to the aisle where I can buy some sort of cereal that's going to last me a month in my storage, in my pantry, versus going to the produce aisle where I'm going to find tomatoes that may last a week if I'm lucky. Well, relative to that, you can see the price difference is significant, especially when we consider that the corn or whatever cereal that you're eating is going to last you significantly longer, but it's not necessarily because it's naturally longer lasting, but because of the process that it's been through. Now, if you process fruits and vegetables, you might be able to get to that same point. But another important note to make is that even the process by which foods go through really impact the way that they affect your health. But it should be clear that there is a big disconnection between what we're actually suggesting that people do and what people can actually afford. So I say all that to say that my call to action would be a couple of things, actually. One is definitely to support your local farmers markets. And the second is also to empower yourself and to try to grow your own food. Because in effect, the suggestions that we've been given are not based on the reality of the economic landscape that we find ourselves in. So until we can find that connection and build a bridge where the fruits and vegetables are actually affordable and we can put them on our plate in such a manner on a regular basis, there's always going to be a disparity between what we're suggesting people do and the health outcomes that they have. And lastly, I think if you can reach out to your local senator and advocate for more incentive to grow fruits and vegetables. I mean, I think it's all connected here. And trying to incentivize these fruits and vegetables, we're trying to also encourage farmers to do it, to use the land to do it. Fruits typically tend to be perennials, so connected to the sequestering of carbon, and also a sustainable way of actually trying to get people to do what we're suggesting them to do. I think that's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Let's see. So if you can stop sharing your screen. We'll see. Robert Chang, how are you doing? Are you at a place where you can speak, or are you still driving on the road?
Hi, Dr. Stoner. I am still on the road. I'm going to be on the road for the next 3+ hours. I'm still in New Jersey.
Oh, you're in New Jersey. Okay. All right. So in that case, I think
that's okay.
If you're not going to be able to make a presentation, then I think what we'll do is open up the question and answers, and and perhaps there will be questions for you. So just so people know, Robert Chang is the policy director of the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust, and he's also an organic farmer in Woodstock, Connecticut. So so he also knows a lot about about these programs from the point of view of both a policy director and a farmer. So you may be able to respond to some of these questions anyway. Okay, so I see that Maple Osterbrink has been putting a lot of things in the chat, and I wonder if you want to actually ask a question or have a comment. Maybe you can't speak. Let's see, let's look at participants. Oh, no, I don't see you in here anymore, even. Okay.
Kim, this is Jeremy. In this format, the audience can't speak, but they can put questions in the Q&A.
Okay, yeah, so, and she's been putting things in the chat, actually. I assume that's she, I don't know. Earthbill.org, I guess that's what she's doing, is contributing that website, earthbill.org. Okay. So are there other questions? Do people want to put questions in the, let's see. So Maggie is saying, Peter, have you been in regular contact with Representative Rosa DeLauro? I think actually Peter and MC and I all live in Rosa DeLauro's district. So that's a question that any of us might answer. I have not been in regular contact with her, but I have written to her a number of times, and it would be good to talk with her. Have you, Peter or MC, been in contact with Rosa DeLauro about any of these issues?
So I have not. I'm definitely on the ground here with my work. Not to say that it's not an important thing to try to advocate for policy change. Obviously, I think that's the way that we're going to have to go about it to try to get some significant changes to happen. But I've been busy managing this program. It's a lot. So to be honest with you, no, I have not reached out.
Yeah, you're more of a hands-on kind of person. Okay, yeah. MC, have you been in contact with her?
Yeah, I mean, whenever we want her to take action, we'll reach out as an organization, and she's also come to a few of our events over the years to talk about land access and talk about opportunities for farmers of color in Connecticut. She was actually pretty pivotal in passing some of the initial funding for the farm that I work at, Massara Community Farm, which is owned by the town of Woodbridge, which is a pretty unique setup in Connecticut. So yeah, have been able to have some cool conversations with her about land access and support for town farmer collaborations.
Yeah, she was she got a substantial amount of money to help out Massara Farm at the beginning, I know. Yeah, so just to talk a little bit about the congressional and Senate representation. So Johanna Hayes is actually the congressperson that we have who is on the House Agriculture Committee. Rosa DeLauro is very important on the Appropriations Committee. And I just looked up a lot of Johanna Hayes's positions, and she has been a co-sponsor of a lot of the bills that that NOFA is interested in, Connecticut NOFA is interested in, and including the land access and opportunity bill that you talked about as well, MC, as has Joe Courtney in Eastern Connecticut, and I think also Chris Murphy, the Senator Chris Murphy. So we do have had some support from our congresspeople and senators, but it's good to be in contact with them about more of these issues. I also see that Claudia Allen asked, do you know if the Inflation Reduction Act funding can be used for biodigester upgrades? So that, I think, refers to anaerobic digestion of manure, and also it's sometimes used for food wastes. My understanding is that some of the conservation funding can in fact go for anaerobic digestion. I don't know if specifically the Inflation Reduction Act can. Do you know of that, MC?
The Inflation Reduction Act money, it gives additional funds to 2 NRCS programs, EQIP, EQIP, and CSP, the Conservation Stewardship Program. I don't know off the top of my head whether biodigesters are included on their like approved list of conservation practices. I don't think that they are. Do you know, Robert? I feel like you're more likely to know than me. Also, if it's not safe to come off mute, don't do it.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, yes. So, yes, if we are talking about anaerobic digesters for dairy farms, yes, waste management is an approved conservation practice. Not only,
yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
So, and I know, as I said, that like 50% of EQIP funding has to go to livestock farms. So if that is an approved conservation practice, probably some of it does go to anaerobic digesters because livestock farms have a high priority, I know.
Yeah, that said, the cost of these digesters is huge. Digesters, the cost of a digester is well north of $1 million. Not only is it available is funding available for this through NRCS, it's also available through some of the other climate smart ag funding through the IRA that GoAg made available to other organizations for climate smart grant programs. So it is included, it is there.
Okay, all right, thank you. Yeah, so to give some context about that, so as Robert was saying, they're a huge investment. And I have seen sustainable farming advocacy groups saying that they tend to encourage dairy farms to get larger because you have this giant anaerobic digester that you have to keep feeding, and that so they tend to be increasing the size and intensity of large animal feeding operations, including dairy farms, in some of the discussion that I have seen about them. So, other questions? All right, yeah, so Maggie Goodwin was asking whether Rosa DeLauro cares about food additives and so on. So, yeah, as we said, she's in appropriations, so she's mostly dealing with like how money gets spent. She's the ranking member of the Appropriations Committee. And I don't know about her specifically being involved in those issues. Are there other kinds of questions? Let's see. Let's look at the Q&A. Let's see. So Melinda Tuhus mentions that 4 food additives were just banned in California, including Red 40. And Peter is nodding. Apparently he has heard this. Do you have a comment about that, Peter?
I think there's like a Netflix movie that I saw recently with Rosa in it. I think it was called Poisoned or something like that. And there's like an interview with her, and it just kind of shows that obviously Rosa's very interested in the topic and invested in trying to make some change.
Okay, I did not know that. Okay.
But yeah, Red 40 at last, it's very good news. At least one state is being progressive about trying to address the issues that we're seeing many years after it was approved on the federal level.
I don't know if this specifically applies to that, but one of the marker bills that the NOFAs are opposing is called the EATS Act, which is like ending agricultural suppression. And it would eliminate the ability of states to regulate a lot of aspects of agricultural production and trade across state borders, so that so it seems like it's a very extensive set of regulations that might affect things like whether a state can ban food additives that were added in other states and then shipped across the state borders. I don't know enough about the specifics, but it might affect that. See more Q&A here. Let's see. So Melinda Tuhus asks, where do farm workers fit in your organizations? Do you want to respond to that, MC? How farm workers fit into?
That's a great question, and I appreciate it as a farm worker myself. So there's many farm owners and there's also many farm employees in our organization. I will say that most folks who are members speak English as a first language, and are farm workers who are not on an H-2A visa and not going back home to a different place in the off season. But we've been really increasing our reach to folks who are migrant farm workers in Connecticut, which there's like 5,500 of per year. I think the range that the Department of Labor gave me is 5,000 to 7,000 every year, which is kind of crazy that they don't know a more exact number. But anyway, part of the one of the COVID packages was some coronavirus relief payments for farm workers. And we were tapped to partner with the Hispanic Federation to give out those in Connecticut. And these are $600 one-time payments for any, farm worker who worked during the pandemic. It's been a really great learning opportunity for us. We've already given out 500 of them, and we have 500 more to give out. So I've just been like spending the whole summer driving after work hours to giant tobacco farms and nurseries and orchards all around the state, and meeting folks when they come out of work and helping them fill out the application. And we've given out like $300,000, which is really awesome. And yeah, I think it's helping me understand the like overlapping but sometimes different needs and priorities of folks who are in my situation, where I was born and raised in the US and I'm making a career in agriculture, versus being born and raised somewhere else and deciding to come to Connecticut temporarily to work on a farm and then go back. There's a lot of farm workers from Jamaica, especially in Connecticut, but from Mexico and Guatemala as well. So I'm really looking forward to continuing that work and learning more about the priorities of those folks. I think for me, one of the biggest policy shifts that I want to see happen, just in terms of how we talk about farmers, is really including farm workers in that definition of farmer. I think the Connecticut Department of Agriculture and the USDA really shoot our industry in the foot when they don't think about employee retention, employee well-being, and employee skills when they think about supporting the US agricultural industry. It's so hard to make a living as a farm worker, and I say that as a farm worker with immense privilege. And we're not eligible for most of the labor protections that other fields are eligible for. We're not eligible for overtime. I think our survey said that only 5% of folks are able to access health insurance through there's not a lot of protections for farm workers out there, but excited to see states like New York passing some pretty progressive farm workers' rights legislation, and definitely hoping that through expanding our network and learning more, we can start doing some of that work as well. So definitely always important to have farm workers in the conversation. I also just want to shout out an organization called Not Our Farm. They do a really great job putting together resources and zines and stuff for people who make their careers in ag but are not farm owners.
I also want to mention Elizabeth Henderson, who in NOFA, New York, who has been deeply involved in advocating for farm workers as well, and through an organization that's called the Agricultural Justice Project. So she has been working very hard to educate the rest of us about the issues that farm workers have, in particular immigrant farm workers have. Okay, are there other questions? So I'll just put Agricultural Justice Project in the chat. I don't know the website for it though. Okay, I am not seeing more questions in the chat or in the Q&A. So, oh, there we go. So yeah, Mary Woolsey says Representative Jim McGovern from just across the border in Massachusetts has been a strong advocate for Massachusetts organic and diversified farms and nutrition. And I recognize that name. Yeah, I believe that he is on the Agriculture Committee in the House and has introduced a number of the marker bills. So yes, there are a number of people throughout the congressional representatives and senators throughout the Northeast who have been good advocates for organic and diversified farms. So yeah, thank you for that. Other questions or comments? I am not seeing any. So yeah, did you want to say something, MC? You were just unmuted to yourself. Does anybody want to have a closing statement before we go?
I was just going to say that I accidentally made this question disappear by answering it, but Maggie Goodwin suggested that we talk to the Husky for Immigrants Coalition about the the farm worker relief payments, which I really appreciate, and asked if the presenter's contact info could be shared after the event.
Okay, yes. Yeah, and actually I will save the chat and we can save a lot of, share a lot of these links and things as well. Okay. So yes, Sarah thanks us, and I thank all of you. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your action items. And thanks to all of the people listening. And I believe that Connecticut NOFA should have a list of all of you who were listening, and we should be able to send out the panelists' contact information and these links. So thank you, and good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.